We are opening up a stack of source material today that really forces us to question the very foundation of how we approach critical thinking and moral judgment.
Yeah, it's some heavy stuff.
Definitely. And I have a provocative question to start us off for you, the listener. How did resentment, that boiling frustration we feel when we lack the agency to act, to strike back, or maybe to fix a problem, how did that become one of the fundamental building blocks for modern morality? And maybe more immediately, how does it fuel so many of the outrage cycles we see consuming the internet today?
Today, we aren't just looking at the content of our beliefs, are we? We're looking at the architecture behind them. We are exploring three distinct, really powerful tools: Nietzsche's genealogy, then street epistemology, or SE, and finally the genealogy of beliefs, GOB. And these are designed not just to analyze and test beliefs, but, maybe more importantly, to fundamentally redesign how those most important beliefs function in our lives, in our organizations.
And we are operating with a clear mission here. We want to provide you with a shortcut, basically, to understanding where beliefs come from. So the context.
The history.
The history, yeah. And then how reliable the methods for holding them actually are. That's the testing part.
Calibration.
And finally, how to collaboratively map a future. That's the design element. And we are going to focus really intensely on how to use these methods without mushing them together because, when you confuse the tools, you end up doing the wrong job, right?
Oh, keeping those distinctions clear is absolutely non-negotiable. It's crucial for any productive work here. Let's maybe set the stage with our core metaphor because that helps.
Good idea.
Okay, so think of genealogy as an X-ray, not a verdict. The hidden scaffolding, maybe the skeletal fractures of a belief system.
Okay, X-ray. Got it.
Then street epistemology. That's like a pressure test, not a biography. It rigorously checks the reliability of the tools, the methods you use to hold your beliefs. How good is your justification process?
Right, the method, not the person.
Correct. And third, the genealogy of beliefs. This one's a map, not a scoreboard. It helps you plot a collaborative path forward by separating the value of the belief from its historical baggage.
That structural separation seems key. And before we unpack this incredible material any further, we really want you to know that the research papers, the AI persona we used for the initial synthesis, and all the relevant source material we're talking about today, it's all linked for you right there in the description below.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
So now let's jump into the foundational tool. Friedrich Nietzsche and his, radical historical excavation of morality.
Okay, so when you pick up Nietzsche's On the Genealogy of Morals, published way back in 1887, you have to understand, he is not offering a philosophy on how to live well. That's not the point.
Right, it's not a self-help book.
Not at all. He is acting like a historian and maybe a psychologist, performing this massive excavation. He wasn't interested in whether a moral concept was right according to some timeless code. No. He was, obsessively focused on digging up the historical and psychological origins of our most fundamental moral concepts.
Things like good and evil, guilt, conscience.
All of those. Things we usually just assume have always meant the same thing, He wanted to know where they came from.
So he's essentially saying that our moral vocabulary is contingent. It didn't just appear from thin air or divine reason.
It emerged. It emerged from specific moments of shifting power dynamics, intense psychological stress, social needs.
That's a big claim.
It is. Genealogy reveals that what we often call moral truth is, it's often just crystallized history, the result of acute social needs and specific psychological pressures at a certain point in time. It illuminates the functional purpose of a moral system. Like, what work did it do for the people who invented it?
Okay, the function.
But I want to be really clear here. Simply showing the messy, human, sometimes uncomfortable origins of a moral concept doesn't automatically prove the value itself is false or bad. That would be the genetic fallacy.
Right. Just because it came from somewhere messy doesn't mean it's useless now.
Genealogy just shows you the scaffolding underneath. It illuminates. It doesn't necessarily demolish.
That's a really important distinction to make right up front because the concept he outlines in the first essay of this master morality versus slave morality, that feels inherently charged, doesn't it? How did Nietzsche differentiate where these two types of moral codes actually started?
Okay, so master morality is relatively straightforward. It's the moral code of the dominant group, the throng, the noble, the powerful. They define good purely as self-affirmation, what they are.
Like strong, proud.
Strong, proud, life-affirming, capable of great things.
Yeah.
And bad is simply the contrast. What is vulgar, weak, maybe beneath them, but there's no real moral judgment, no condemnation in their bad category. It's more descriptive. You are not like us.
Okay. And the inversion, the big flip, comes with slave morality. This is where we get back to our starting question about resentment, right?
This is absolutely central. The slave morality is the product of constrained agency. The slaves, the oppressed, the weakened poses, they cannot physically or politically retaliate against their masters. It's just not possible.
They're stuck.
They're stuck. And that tremendous pent-up frustration, that burning, internalized helplessness, it doesn't just vanish. Nietzsche calls this resentment. It is the psychological engine, the fuel, that drives a complete moral reversal, a revaluation of all values.
So instead of being crushed by their weakness, they reinterpret it. They flip the script. They can't strike the master physically, but they can judge him morally.
That's it. They create a moral language where the master's attributes, their strength, their pride, their wealth, their power, are suddenly condemned as evil.
The very things the masters valued in themselves.
Become the definition of evil. And the slave's own forced attributes, things like pity, patience, humility, suffering, these are redefined as good or virtue. The entire moral universe gets turned upside down, driven by this deep internalized frustration seeking an outlet. It's moral judgment providing agency where physical agency is impossible.
Wow. That is a staggering pathology he's describing. Let's connect that insight to modern life before we move to the second essay. We talk about online outrage loops, but where else do we see this resentment driving moralized condemnation today? It feels very relevant.
Oh, it's everywhere. Everywhere you see motivated moralizing that seems disproportionately focused on tearing down external figures or groups. Think about purity movements, maybe in professional settings or social spheres. When individuals feel they lack the power to create, to build, or to achieve meaningful structural change, they can always achieve a kind of moral superiority by tearing down the perceived failures or impurities of others.
It's easier to criticize than create.
And the act of condemnation elevates their status, provides a sense of identity, a sense of belonging to the good group. It's the moralization of impotence, in a way. It's deeply satisfying psychologically, even when it accomplishes absolutely nothing materially.
And often it seems like the intensity of the moral condemnation is almost inversely related to the individual's ability to actually affect real change in the situation.
That's a sharp observation. Now, on to the second essay, guilt and bad conscience. Tracing those concepts back to the creditor-debtor dynamic. It requires a massive conceptual leap, maybe, but Nietzsche argues it's essential. He argues that the oldest relationship in human culture isn't love or empathy, but the material, very pragmatic relationship of creditor and debtor. If you owe a debt material, or maybe even a favor, and you fail to pay, the creditor historically had the right to inflict a certain amount of pain on you, as compensation, essentially, for the pleasure or benefit they lost.
So punishment is repayment.
In its most primal form, yes. This is the origin, he argues, of justice and punishment. A very physical, very direct transaction.
Okay, so how does that physical, material punishment, move from external social control to becoming internal self-punishment? That's the bad conscience part, right?
Right. As society grows more complex, more organized, and as the individual is forced to live within a highly regulated state, a state that tames and, crucially, internalizes their aggressive instinctual drives, those drives have nowhere to go. They can't be expressed outwardly anymore without severe consequences.
So they turn inward.
The human, unable to strike out against the external environment, begins to strike out against himself or herself. The social cruelty of the original punishment dynamic gets internalized. You become your own internal judge, your own creditor, perpetually reminding yourself that you are in debt to society, maybe to God or to some abstract ideal.
Wow. That makes profound sense in a modern professional context, actually. We have this perpetual time debt or attention debt or maybe an internalized productivity debt to our careers or our institutions. It often manifests as this chronic, low-grade professional guilt, doesn't it? Even when we haven't actually failed at anything concrete.
That's the modern bad conscience at work, you could say. We are chronically disciplined by ourselves, aren't we? And the underlying mechanism is often an anxiety about violating these rapidly shifting, complex, internalized standards that we feel we owe obedience to.
Okay. Finally, let's quickly touch on the third essay, Ascetic Ideals. This is where Nietzsche connects that deep psychological need for meaning to the reality of suffering.
The ascetic ideal is incredibly powerful, incredibly sticky, precisely because it addresses the deepest human dread. Meaninglessness, life involves suffering, that seems unavoidable, and that can feel terrifying and chaotic.
So the ideal gives it structure.
It provides a framework. It could be a traditional monastic order, or a modern devotion to extreme purity, or even certain forms of radical self-denial in politics or lifestyle. It takes that suffering and turns it into a moral purpose. It essentially says, you suffer for a reason. Your pain isn't random, it's meaningful sacrifice.
Which I guess stabilizes identity and maybe community if everyone shares that ideal. It provides a shared goal, a shared narrative.
Absolutely. It provides tremendous function, a sense of control, a sense of purpose. But often, Nietzsche warns, at the price of sanctioning hostility toward life itself, or demanding perpetual self-denial as the only proof of virtue. Genealogy helps us see this powerful, often hidden scaffolding underneath all our moral talk.
But as you noted, illumination isn't demolition. Seeing the history doesn't tell us what to do now.
Right. To move forward productively, we need to test the tools, the methods we use to maintain these beliefs in the present. Which brings us nicely to street epistemology. Okay, so if Nietzsche gives us the X-ray of the belief's history and function.
The why behind it.
Right. Then street epistemology, or SE, provides the rigorous pressure test of the belief's present methods. How reliable is the way you know what you know? SE is a structured, often very Socratic, conversational practice focused entirely on testing the reliability of the methods people use to form and keep their beliefs. It doesn't debate the claim itself, it debates the justification for the claim.
So the goal is purely about calibration and maybe epistemic humility. It's asking the listener, essentially, okay, given the tool you use to arrive at this conclusion, how confident should you realistically be?
That is a perfect way to summarize it. The success metric isn't changing the person's mind about the content of the belief, not necessarily. It's about improving their calibration, increasing their humility about the method they use to confirm it. Is this method actually trustworthy?
And there's a structure to it.
Oh yes, it's quite disciplined.
Yeah.
First, you clarify the claim, make sure everyone is talking about the same thing precisely. Second, you surface the method.
Yeah.
How exactly did you come to know this is true?
Yeah.
What process did you use? Third, you explore the reliability of that specific method. You test it, maybe apply it across diverse contexts. Does it work consistently? And fourth, you reflect. How might these findings about the method's reliability change your confidence level in the original claim?
When we look back at those strong moral intuitions, maybe the ones driven by resentment, those snap judgments about who is morally wrong, SE seems like a really necessary antidote to, well, impulsive condemnation.
It absolutely is. The challenge, as our source material points out quite clearly, is that people often use unreliable moral methods, especially in high-emotion contexts. They might rely on intuiting motives, assuming they know why someone did something.
Or tribal consensus, like everyone I know agrees, so it must be true.
Right. Or maybe viral evidence that's only shared within their own echo chamber. These methods are inherently biased. They're prone to error.
So SE forces a kind of check. It makes the believer step back from the intense emotional content, that satisfying feeling of maybe being morally superior, and actually look at the mechanism that's generating that feeling. Is the mechanism sound?
Yes. If your method is, say, I know X is wrong because my group is universally condemning X, SE requires you to check if that method is reliable when applied neutrally to groups you don't belong to, for instance. Does group consensus reliably lead to truth in all contexts? Or does it just happen to lead to conclusions your group benefits from believing? That's the tough question SE poses.
Let's share one of the runnable prompts we found in the source material. Something the listener can maybe use right now to pressure test one of their own beliefs.
Yeah, these are useful. A great prompt designed to force that kind of neutral application is this. Okay, if we applied this same way of identifying moral wrongs, let's say, using viral emotional evidence shared in our feed. If we applied that same method to cases where our own group or leaders were accused, how would we tell if the method was still leading us to accurate conclusions? Or might it just be generating results that reinforce our existing loyalty?
Oof. That forces some self-reflection on the mechanism of trust itself, doesn't it?
It's designed to. It creates that necessary dissonance.
That is definitely a moment of necessary dissonance. And if you're getting those genuine moments of critical self-reflection right now, those little aha moments, don't forget to like this deep dive, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that bell. It really helps us know what kind of knowledge you value most. And, well, we want to keep bringing you these deep dives that give you the tools to analyze the world around you.
Absolutely. So, returning to SE, let's look at testing guilt and those complex, internalized norms that Nietzsche identified. Again, the goal isn't necessarily to erase the guilt, that might be therapeutic work, but to test the rule-generating mechanism behind it.
Okay, so we're testing the consistency and reliability of the method that created the rule in the first place. For instance, the method might be something like, I follow my community's norms because they feel ancient and stable, or perhaps I trust authority figure X implicitly on this matter.
Right. And we use SE to probe for independent verification. Is the mechanism generating this rule actually robust? For example, if you rely on authority X, a good SE question would be, how often has authority X been objectively correct about claims in domains where we can actually verify the truth, like, say, science or history, or maybe even logistics?
Ah, so you check their track record in areas where facts are clearer.
It moves the discussion away from the emotional weight or burden of obeying the rule and focuses it entirely on the empirical track record of the authority or the intuition or whatever method is being used.
Makes sense. And what would be maybe the best runnable prompt for testing the reliability of an internalized authority or a strong intuition?
You could try something like this. How could someone completely independent of your community or your background check, whether this authority or this intuition, tends to produce accurate judgments across a variety of different, maybe unrelated domains?
And if the answer is,
Well, if the answer is they couldn't, you just have to feel it, or you have to be part of the group to understand, then the reliability of the method is, by definition, pretty low from an objective standpoint. Regardless of how comforting or important the belief feels subjectively, SE helps you perhaps accept that realization about the method's limits.
okay, so we've used genealogy for the X-ray, understanding the history and the function of a belief.
The why.
We've used street epistemology for the pressure test, assessing the reliability of the method.
The how reliably.
Right. Now, we move to the third tool, which feels quite different. It's the genealogy of beliefs, or GOBI, developed by Kevin Elsing. This framework feels fundamentally constructive because it shifts our focus entirely away from the past, or even the present truth claim, towards future alignment and action.
That forward-looking facilitation focus is precisely what makes GOTI so valuable, especially in, say, organizational settings or maybe difficult family conversations where you're stuck. GOBI is used to map the lineage of a belief, where it came from, what keeps it going, and, critically, to align on a shared future. It is essentially a planning map for next step commitments, not an intellectual scoreboard for who's right or wrong.
So it deliberately bypasses the question of truth or falsehood.
Largely, yes. To focus instead on function, context, and alignment. What do we need to do together going forward?
The tree metaphor used in the sources is really effective for this. Can you walk us through that four-part lineage structure? Because I think it helps listeners structure their own thinking about any kind of sticky belief they might have.
Absolutely. Think of the belief like a tree, and we're mapping four distinct parts. First, you have the roots. These are the lived experiences, the formative moments, maybe key people, or even primary traumas that originally seeded this belief. This is the deep historical context for the individual or group.
Where it started.
Where it started. Second, you have the trunk. The trunk is simply the present, concise, and ideally neutral core statement of the belief itself. What is the belief, stated clearly?
Okay, roots and trunk. Then we get to the branches. These feel particularly relevant because they explain why the belief persists now, right? Even if the original roots aren't really relevant anymore.
Precisely. The branches represent the current environmental pressures. They are the social expectations, maybe the institutional KPIs you're measured against, the current organizational structure, or the key relationships that keep the belief constantly reinforced and maybe enforced in the present day. If the roots are historical, the branches are the contemporary forces giving the belief its current power, its teeth.
What keeps it alive today? Got it. And the final piece, the canopy. This is where the design phase really happens, moving us away from just diagnosis.
The canopy is the co-designed shared future statement. It answers the functional requirement. Okay, even if we couldn't agree 100% on this specific belief, the trunk, what functional outcome would we still need to achieve together? The canopy is designed specifically to capture the core value, the important function of the belief, while allowing the specific doctrine, the trunk, to potentially change or be refined over time.
So the success metric for GOBI isn't winning an argument.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's achieving mutual clarity, getting a strong sense of shared context. Now I see why you believe that. And generating concrete, accountable next step commitments based on that canopy statement.
Let's try applying GOBI to one of those sticky historical beliefs we talked about. Mapping guilt or bad conscience, those deeply internalized, often quite crippling norms.
Gobi is perfect for this because it helps separate the emotional burden from the structural context holding it in place. We trace the roots. Was it a specific religious teaching growing up, a hypercritical parent, maybe a mentor who demanded absolute, unforgiving rigor?
Identifying the origin points.
Then, crucially, we ask about the branches. Which current relationships, perhaps a demanding boss right now, a competitive peer group, or maybe just a highly active internal critical monologue, which of these are currently reinforcing that rule today, making it hard to let go of?
The purpose here is to show the person or the group that the belief isn't just floating in space, it's being actively held in place by visible current environmental pressures. Pressures they might actually be able to negotiate or change.
That's the idea. Instead of getting bogged down in maybe therapy about the original trauma or endless debate about the rule's ultimate validity, we are simply charting the forces currently at work. A really great Gobi prompt to reveal that modern pressure could be. Okay, which formative moments really lock this rule into your identity? Those are the roots. And which current relationships or roles, those are the branches, give this rule its teeth right now?
That's very clarifying. Now let's tackle the ascetic ideals that need to find meaning through perpetual sacrifice or struggle. These are often beliefs like, if I'm not constantly struggling, I'm not really contributing value. How does Gobi help design a future for someone holding that belief?
This is a beautiful use case for the Canopy phase of Gobi. First, we map the narratives and life events, the roots that made struggle feel meaningful, even necessary. Maybe the family narrative was, we built everything we have through sheer pain and effort. Or perhaps the corporate culture's founding history is steeped in the early heroic struggle defined who we are. The beliefs often becomes, hardship is the only reliable, measurable proof of contribution or worth.
Okay, so the canopy then needs to somehow preserve the true core value, which might be contribution or growth or commitment, but decouple it from the absolute necessity of pain or suffering as the only acceptable evidence.
That's the design constraint we work with. We define the desired future state based on measurable, positive outcomes, not just suffering endured. So we ask the question, what kind of future can truly honor your core value here? Let's say it's contribution or maybe growth, but without requiring perpetual sacrifice as the only acceptable proof of virtue. The resulting canopy statement might be something like, a future where growth is measured by positive impact and sustained capacity, not primarily by stress levels and burnout. And that canopy statement directly facilitates a shared commitment to constructive, sustainable change.
Okay, we have covered 3 extremely powerful but also very distinct methods here. And it seems absolutely vital that the listener doesn't try to use them interchangeably, right? You wouldn't use an X-ray to build a map.
You wouldn't. Let's quickly review the goals again and maybe the artifact, the output that each method produces, because that helps keep them straight. Okay, so it's a difference between diagnostics, validation, and design. Genealogy explains origins and function. Its artifact is an explanatory narrative. Why does this belief exist? What work does it do?
The X-ray report.
Right. Street epistemology tests the reliability of methods. Its artifact is a calibrated appraisal. How trustworthy is the way you came to this belief?
The pressure test results.
You got it. And the genealogy of beliefs maps the context and co-designs futures. Its artifact is a lineage map, roots, trunk, branches, plus that forward-looking canopy statement.
The blueprint for the future.
So use the X-ray when you need to understand the deep history and function. Use the pressure test when you need to assess the reliability of the justification. And use the map when you need alignment and a plan for moving forward together.
Knowing which tool for which job. That makes sense. And understanding the methods behind belief is so crucial for personal growth, professional development, really everything, which is why we strongly encourage you, the listener, to go deeper into the second of our tools today.
The SE part.
Yes. We really encourage you to take the free Street Epistemology course available over at navigatingbeliefs.com. It's practical, it's accessible, and honestly, it will fundamentally change how you approach conversations about difficult or contentious topics. Navigatingbeliefs.com.
It's a fantastic resource.
Yeah.
Now, before we try applying all 3 of these tools to a complex, real-world claim, we absolutely must address the essential caveats. Because misusing these tools is unfortunately easy, and it often results in bad faith arguments or even causes harm.
Right. I recall the source material emphasizing that genealogy, the Nietzschean part, should not be used as simple demolition.
That's critical.
Mm,
When you illuminate the messy, maybe power-driven origins of concepts like fairness or justice, the temptation is huge to just say, look, it's all just resentment, therefore it's fake or bad or we should discard it. That is a very common intellectual misstep. Showing the functional origin, however uncomfortable, doesn't automatically void the current utility or the subjective moral weight of the value today. It just provides deeper, maybe more challenging context.
Okay, context, not invalidation. And we also noted that SE, street epistemology, is focused on testing methods, not conducting therapy.
Yes, SE has clear limits. It's focused on the epistemic claim, the knowledge claim, and its justification. You might successfully demonstrate to someone that their method for forming a particular belief is faulty. Maybe they rely purely on subjective intuition, and you show that intuition is unreliable in this area. But if that belief, however poorly justified, is providing them with deep psychological stability, maybe shielding them from acknowledging trauma or giving their life meaning, they will likely hold on to it regardless of the evidence about the method. SE is successful if they simply admit their confidence level should be lower based on the method's weakness. Pushing past that into the domain of deep emotional need is really outside its scope and can be counterproductive.
Right. Different tools for different needs. And finally, Gobi, the genealogy of beliefs, is focused squarely on clarity and alignment, not on winning the debate about who's right.
If you bring the attitude of scoring truth claims, of trying to prove the other person wrong into the Gobi framework, you immediately shatter the psychological safety required for genuine alignment. Gobi works by starting with the assumption, what if we assumed everyone here already has a good reason, from their perspective, for holding this belief? Let's just understand what those reasons and contexts are. It deliberately avoids debate to focus entirely on co-designing that shared future, the canopy.
Okay, that's crucial framing. Let's put all three tools into practice now with a very common, very strong modern claim we mentioned earlier. The idea that remote work inevitably destroys team culture. This is a really sticky belief held by many established leaders today. Let's walk through how these three tools would interact with that single belief in maybe a difficult conversation.
Great example. We start with genealogy, contextualize. We gently probe the leader holding this belief. Where did this deep conviction about the necessity of physical presence actually come from? It's rarely based purely on recent data.
Right, it feels deeper than that.
Often, the value was derived from their own early career experiences. Maybe back when physical presence was essential for apprenticeship, for mentorship, for just learning the ropes. The leadership culture they grew up in may have implicitly equated visibility seeing people at their desks with commitment. Almost like a physical manifestation of that old creditor-debtor dynamic, paying your dues through presence.
And then maybe the high-stress context of the pandemic hardened it. Maybe it triggered a kind of resentment-like reaction. They lost control over where people worked. And that feeling of powerlessness got translated into a moralized condemnation. Remote work is inherently bad. It's destructive to culture. The function of the belief becomes providing psychological control and maybe signaling commitment to the organization's history or traditional ways.
That's a very plausible genealogical reading. Spot on. Now, okay, we move to street epistemology. Test the method. What is the underlying method being used to defend the belief that remote work destroys culture? It's likely some version of visibility or physical co-location is a reliable proxy for judging culture quality.
Okay, so SE needs to pressure test that proxy. We'd ask, how do you know that visibility reliably correlates with positive culture quality? How could we actually test this assumption rather than just asserting it?
We'd suggest an objective check. We could ask the leader to work with us to compare two types of teams. One group with high visibility, maybe fully in office, and another with low visibility, perhaps fully remote or significantly hybrid. Then, crucially, we compare them using independent objective metrics of culture. Things like employee retention rates, validated psychological safety scores from surveys, maybe 360-degree feedback data focused specifically on collaboration quality, or even objective measures of innovation output. If the low visibility teams consistently score as well as, or maybe even higher than, the high visibility teams on these objective culture metrics, then the method itself, the assumption that visibility equals good culture, is shown to be unreliable, regardless of how strong the emotional attachment is to the belief in co-location.
Right. This shifts the entire conversation away from just personal preference or historical anecdote towards actual epistemic integrity. Does the way we're judging this actually work?
It does. And finally, assuming the method might be flawed, but acknowledging the belief still serves an important function, like preserving a sense of control or tradition, we use genealogy of beliefs, map and design, to figure out the path forward. We need alignment, not just proof.
Okay, so we mapped the lineage for this remote work destroys culture belief. What are the roots?
Roots are likely things like those physical apprenticeship models from maybe the 1980s or 90s, where proximity really was the main mechanism for mentorship. Maybe past experiences where remote attempts failed due to poor technology or management. The trunk is the core belief, stated simply. To have a strong culture, we must be primarily co-located.
And the branches. What keeps it alive now?
Branches could be the current organizational reality. Maybe existing KPI systems that inadvertently reward input metrics like hours spent at a desk rather than output. Maybe high perceived costs or difficulties associated with managing decentralized data security. Or perhaps there's pressure from a board of directors who still ask for visible proof of activity as a proxy for productivity.
Okay. And the goal of the Canopy phase here is to preserve the core value that the leader genuinely cares about. Maybe it's effective mentorship, strong camaraderie, spontaneous collaboration, but without mandating the potentially flawed mechanism of forced co-location as the only way to achieve it.
That's the design task, exactly. The leader, ideally working collaboratively with their team, co-designs the canopy. They ask, what would a successful future look like? One that demonstrably honors mentorship and camaraderie, but isn't rigidly tied to everyone being in the same physical space all the time.
And the result might be?
The resulting canopy statement might be something like, our shared goal is a culture where mentorship, connection, and collaboration are measurable, frequent, intentional, and fully portable across all work locations and styles.
And that canopy statement, that shared vision, is the artifact that then naturally suggests the concrete next step. Maybe something like, let's pilot a mentorship metrics experiment that's independent of co-location, one that rewards proven knowledge transfer and connection, not just visible presence. That really demonstrates the full life cycle of belief analysis and redesign, doesn't it?
It really shows how the methods can build on each other constructively, moving fairly seamlessly from understanding why the belief exists and persists, using genealogy, to testing how reliable the justification for it is, using SE, and finally to designing what's next collaboratively, using GoB.
This is incredibly actionable. I feel like we should give our listener maybe 3 concrete exercises they could run this week, moving from just analysis to actual design for their own beliefs.
Good idea. First, maybe try the 10-minute SE calibration sprint. Pick a live belief you hold strongly, perhaps especially a moral one, or a strong professional opinion. Ask yourself, what method specifically convinces me this is true? Where has this method performed well for me in the past? And where has it maybe performed poorly or led me astray? And then, the key question, what simple neutral check that I run right now to increase my confidence in the method's reliability or maybe reveal its limits? This moves you straight into calibration mode.
Okay, quick calibration. Second, the GoB lineage card. This is that tree drawing exercise you mentioned.
Right. Literally draw the tree structure. Roots, trunk, branches, canopy on a piece of paper or a whiteboard. And fill in the 4 sections for a belief you find sticky or maybe problematic. Identify maybe 2 or 3 specific roots, key experiences or teachings that seeded the belief. Write the trunk, the core belief statement, as neutrally as possible. List 2 or 3 current branches, present-day pressures keeping it active. And finally, design the canopy. Draft a 1-sentence shared future that preserves the underlying positive value you get from the belief, but without requiring the existing baggage or the potentially flawed doctrine.
Separating value from baggage. Love it. And finally, the genealogical reflection. This feels like a critical solo or maybe group exercise that taps right into Nietzsche's core insight about function.
This one digs deep. Ask yourself or your team, what function does this belief currently perform for us? Does it provide identity, cohesion, a sense of control, meaning be honest about the work it's doing? Separate that function from the factual claim or the doctrine itself. Then ask the really challenging functional question. If we found another way, a different method or belief, to reliably achieve those same functional benefits, the identity, the cohesion, the meaning, without needing this specific belief itself, would we be willing to take it? This powerfully separates the belief's role in your life or system from its specific content or doctrine. So let's circle all the way back to our initial provocative question that started this deep dive. How did resentment become such a foundational moral building block?
Yeah, how did that happen?
Well, the historical answer, drawing heavily on Nietzsche, is that the practical inability of oppressed groups to act directly against their oppressors resulted in a necessary, almost inevitable, psychological reversal of values, the invention of what he termed slave morality. This new moralized system served vital functions. It stabilized the community, it provided internal meaning in the face of suffering, and ultimately it solidified a distinct identity separate from and morally superior to the masters.
And we still see that functional aspect today.
We absolutely still see this essential function playing out. Think about how constant online outrage cycles can provide immediate, powerful, moralized meaning and group identity through shared condemnation, especially in situations where direct, constructive action feels difficult or impossible. The pattern repeats.
So the final summary seems pretty clear. Use Nietzschean genealogy to understand the hidden scaffolding, the history, and maybe the necessary function of your core values and beliefs. Then, use street epistemology to rigorously pressure test the reliability of the tools, the methods you use to arrive at and maintain those values.
Check your justification.
And finally, use the genealogy of beliefs to map the entire context, past roots, present branches, and collaboratively design a clear, aligned future step using the Canopy.
Plan the way forward.
Use them deliberately, know which tool you're using, and maybe only switch lanes when you know which artifact illumination, appraisal, or map you actually need next for the task at hand.
And we learned today, quite profoundly, I think, that beliefs often serve a vital function like providing cohesion or meaning or a sense of control that is often completely separate from their objective truth value. This raises a really important, maybe slightly uncomfortable question for continued exploration that we want to leave you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay, what's the final thought?
If you successfully map a sticky belief using something like Gobi, and you find that it serves an important, perhaps even necessary, function in your life or your organization, what is the ethical weight or responsibility involved in potentially replacing that belief? Especially if you aim to replace it with a newer, maybe more evidence-based or more technically accurate one that is perhaps significantly less functional in providing that meaning or cohesion.
Wow. That is a fascinating conflict to ponder, that potential trade-off between accuracy and utility, between truth and function. We really want to hear your thoughts on that very tension. Start a conversation with us down in the comments section below and let us know. Have you tried one of the exercises this week? Maybe the Gobi lineage card or that 10-minute SE sprint? Share what surprised you about your own methods or what you uncovered when you started digging at the roots of your own deepest convictions.
We genuinely look forward to seeing what you discover.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.